Coming off the heels of Friday Night SmackDown and Roman Reigns' 1,000-day celebration as the WWE Undisputed Universal Champion, not only was he awarded a new Golden Championship to commemorate the memorable run, but he also had another story arc develop in the crumbling of the Bloodline. The last video I made on the topic discussed Night of Champions 2023, and I titled it, Jimmy Uso Fires the First Shot in a Civil War. Well, it looks as if the Civil War battle lines have been drawn and the sides have been chosen. The Usos, Jimmy and Jay, will align together to battle their other brother in Solo Sikoa and the tribal chief Roman Reigns. Reigns' Thanos-like approach has finally worn off on Jimmy and Jay, but you can see with Jay Uso that he's still having trouble trying to decide if this is the right decision. And he wants everybody in the family to cooperate. He wants everybody in the entire family to operate as a well-oiled machine of violence and destruction. But it looks as if those days have passed, and the time of the Bloodline as a cohesive unit is far behind us. And the time for a Bloodline civil war is upon us. It looks as if it will be Solo Sikoa and Roman Reigns battling Jimmy and Jey Uso following the segment on Friday. But one thing that I found very interesting about how the segment played out was the fact that Jimmy finally said it. We all knew it. We all knew that this was occurring, but we finally heard the words uttered that Roman Reigns was abusive and manipulative, and that a brother does not abuse or manipulate his brothers if they are true family. And you heard those words, or a version of those words, come out of the mouth of Jimmy Uso. Jimmy Uso was finally telling Roman Reigns exactly what he needed to hear and telling him that he's gone crazy. The power has gotten to his head, the power struggle, the Thanos-like approach, and the long historic reign of Roman Reigns as the top of Friday Night SmackDown and the top of the WWE has gotten to his head so much that he doesn't even know that what he's doing is wrong. Paul Heyman stayed out of the segment for the majority of it, but Jimmy Uso was finally standing up to his brother. And Jay should have done this a long time ago. And if you take a look at Jay's facial expressions throughout the majority of the segment, even when Jimmy pie-faced Roman Reigns and finally gave him what he deserved after the super kick at Night of Champions, Jay was holding his hands on his head. He was screaming. He was fighting his inner demons after all the abuse, all the manipulation that has broken Jay down to a shell of himself. He's slowly building himself back up, and by the time the Civil War finally occurs, I think we will have the strongest version of Jay both mentally and physically that we've ever seen in the WWE. But he was having a lot of trouble throughout this segment, holding his hands on his head, screaming, flexing his muscles because he just couldn't hold it back anymore. But we need to talk about Solo Sikoa. Solo Sikoa looked as if he was going to be joining his brothers in arms against the tribal chief Roman Reigns. But how can Roman Reigns be the tribal chief when his tribe has started to abandon him? Roman Reigns looked over to Solo Sikoa for reassurance. And Jimmy Uso said that we need to hear from Solo Sikoa himself, and that Solo can speak on his own, and that Roman doesn't have to be the man to speak for him. Solo can be the enforcer, but Roman doesn't have to be his mouthpiece. And he handed the mic off to Solo Sikoa. And Solo Sikoa said, I acknowledge you, my tribal chief. However, these are my brothers. Roman Reigns looked on in fear because he knew that all of his backup was finally abandoning him, that he had to finally stand on his own, and that he maybe wasn't as powerful as he would lead other people to believe. Roman looked on in terror and fear as Solo passed over the microphone to Roman Reigns and walked over to the side of his brothers and Jimmy and Jay. But just as we thought that Roman Reigns would finally be on his own and have to battle the Bloodline by himself, Solo Sikoa would hit Jimmy Uso with a Samoan spike and take him out, showing that his allegiance lies with Roman Reigns, and it doesn't lie with his true brothers. As Jey Uso continued fighting his inner demons, he laid by the side of a fallen brother, and Roman and Solo Sikoa would leave the ring and walk up the ramp. Roman would briefly stop and make a look back towards the ring, and Paul Heyman would say, "But what about Jay?" Now, if you remember, the first video I made on this entire topic was titled, It's About Jay. It's all about Jay. It's about Jay. And the story is still about Jay, but it's becoming more about the family as a whole. And I believe that the whole story is still about Jey Uso. But they're using Jimmy as a brief distraction to really start the fall and the destruction and the domino effect inside of the family and the foundation of the bloodline. Roman would acknowledge Paul Heyman and say that Jay will come around. He always does. And that he'll come home. But I believe this is the first time that Jay will not come home. He will see the strength showcased by Jimmy and the fact that Jimmy did that for him and his true brother. And this will in turn give Jay the strength that he's needed throughout this entire formation of the bloodline since becoming the servant of Roman Reigns. And like I said, he will be the strongest mentally, emotionally, and physically once the Civil War takes place. And it looks as if that will be at SummerSlam, when Jimmy and Jey Uso take on Solo Sikoa and Roman Reigns in the first battle of many during this bloodline civil war.